There are four broad categories when it comes to why people use social media. The first category is connection, the original purpose of social media, staying in touch with friends, families, communities, and to build or maintain relationships. Aunt Maggie got a new dog, how nice. Nephew John got married, she looks like a nice girl. Cousin Brett got married for the fourth time, oh my. Grandma Lori and Grandpa Pete went on vacation in Gary, Indiana, and my roommate from college is in Vegas for the fourth time this year. The second category is entertainment, videos, memes, generally amusing posts. JD Vance is a fat gamer now. JD Vance is basically every single human being in history now. If you go on X, everybody left and right loves those memes. Why does everybody have red laser eyes now?
It was great. And apparently, I've never been on live television before.
Haven't seen that kid for a while. The third category, of course, is information, news, updates, or knowledge on topics of interest, often in real time. Just doom scrolling on X, waiting for World War III to start for the last 10 years. And of course, the final category is self-expression. And opinions are like navels. Everybody's got one. So those are generally the four categories of why people come back and keep coming back to social media: connection, entertainment, news, and self-expression. I think I've found a fifth category of why people use social media, at least on Facebook. And that fifth category is what is known as AI slop, or artificial intelligence slop. Fictitious images generated by artificial intelligence that are not at all real, but depict real-looking people and things with captions designed to ensnare Facebook scrollers. An image of an old lady sitting outside in the snow in front of a fire with the caption, "Today is my birthday, I have no husband, no kids, and I baked a cake all by myself." Or this one, an AI-generated image of three identical-looking toddler girls with the caption, "We're triplets. Today we turned 3 years old, our parents went to war, and our grandma made us a cake. We are so grateful to her." Or how about this? Two AI-generated images back-to-back, one in black and white and one in color with young men, and the other one in color with gray-haired older men with the caption, "We have been together 85 years and all 5 brothers are still alive." Again, all AI-generated. Or how about this one? A little girl who looks at least 3 years old in front of a birthday cake with the caption, "I am one today after my parents passed away. I was raised by my grandmother who baked me this cake, and I am very grateful." So, what's the big deal? Of course, I'm looking at a bunch of AI slop to do this special. Of course, Facebook's algorithm is going to keep feeding me more. Here's what disturbs me. All of the examples I just cited to you have tens of thousands of interactions, shares, or comments. An AI Caucasian young lady posing with her obviously AI Spanish father in front of an AI field of ambiguous crops has 41,000 interactions and 5,000 comments. A young boy, an older man, a golden retriever are sitting in a field with a blanket covered with vegetables in front of them. Caption reads, "The little helper with grandpa showing off the vegetables from the farm." 68,000 interactions, 10,000 comments. A pretty young-looking woman, maybe in her 30s, holding a birthday cake, tears coming from her eyes with the caption, "Today is my 50th birthday. I'm widowed, no children. I bought my own flowers and baked my own cake." 60,000 interactions, 36,000 comments. And about those comments, they all seem very real and very earnest. I can scroll for minutes on end through hundreds of comments on any one of these aforementioned images and never see a single comment even intimating that the image everybody else is commenting on is fake. Every comment either expresses sorrow, sympathy, or empathy if it's a sad post. If it's a happy post, every single comment expresses joy and a vague commentary about their own experience. For instance, if the post is about a farmer and his crops, there will be dozens of unique comments about how farmers are the backbone of civilization, or how they're always overlooked and underappreciated. This AI slop is lapped up to the tune of millions of impressions, tens of thousands of interactions, and thousands of comments. The accounts posting this slop are building their online presence very successfully, I might add, through the overt use of deception, and their tool is artificial intelligence. But the people interacting with these posts, can they all be that gullible? Can they all not even stop for a minute to think, hey, what I'm looking at probably isn't real? Are there hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in our midst who are that dumb? Or am I being too hard on them?
Hello,
Hey, I'm looking for Dr. Hartwood.
this is he.
Hey, Dr. Hartwood, this is Aaron McIntyre from the Dr. Elias Hartwood is an esteemed psychologist in the emerging field of group psychology and artificial intelligence. He has a doctorate in cognitive behavioral studies from the University of Strathmore. He did his doctoral dissertation on the dynamics of emotional resonance in digital environments under the mentorship of Dr. Fiona Calderwood, a name that he'll invoke here in a few minutes. I was able to land an interview with Dr. Hartwood to find answers to the phenomenon I just articulated, the proliferation and success of AI slop on places like Facebook. So, Dr. Hartwood, you specialize in the field of psychology, specifically the interplay between human psychology and social media. My Facebook feed is absolutely filled with what I call AI slop. Obviously, AI-generated imagery depicting usually a subject who has accomplished some great feat who says they've gotten no recognition for it, or an AI-generated picture of children with the caption claiming it's their birthday and their parents are off to war, just slop. Yet these posts routinely have tens of thousands of interactions and sometimes tens of thousands of comments. Are people just that gullible, or is there something more foundational going on here?
That's an excellent question, and it cuts right to the heart of what I've been exploring in my research, particularly the emotional dynamics at play in digital environments. What you're describing, this AI slop, as you aptly call it, isn't merely a matter of gullibility, though that can play a role. There's something more foundational, indeed rooted in how our minds are wired to respond to certain cues, especially in the context of social media. You must consider the mechanics of these posts. They're engineered, whether by human intent or algorithmic trial and error, to trigger an immediate emotional response. A child's birthday with parents at war, or an unsung hero denied their due, taps directly into empathy, indignation, or a sense of moral urgency. These are primal levers of human psychology. My dissertation at Strathmore examined how digital platforms amplify emotional resonance. Essentially, they create a feedback loop where content that provokes strong feelings gets rewarded with engagement, regardless of its veracity. Now, why do people fall for it? It's not just that they're gullible, though admittedly critical thinking can take a backseat online. It's that social media exploits what we might call an attention bias toward emotional salience. Our brains are predisposed to prioritize information that feels urgent or morally charged over, say, a dry fact check. Add to that the sheer volume of content we're bombarded with daily, and the capacity for discernment erodes. People aren't necessarily dupes, they're overwhelmed, and these posts are designed to slip past the filters. There's also a social reinforcement aspect. When you see tens of thousands of interactions, it lends a veneer of legitimacy. Psychologists call this social proof. If everyone else is reacting, it must be real, or at least worth a moment's outrage or a quick like. My work with the International Society for Applied Psychodynamics has looked at how group dynamics in digital spaces mimic traditional crowd behavior, but at hyperspeed and scale. So, to your question, it's not just gullibility, it's a cocktail of emotional manipulation, cognitive overload, and social pressure, all turbocharged by platforms that thrive on engagement over accuracy. The slop works because it's less about truth and more about feeling. And we humans, for better or worse, are feeling creatures first.
So back to these posts, what's particularly striking to me, especially the ones with tens of thousands of interactions and hundreds, if not thousands, of comments, Dr. Hartwood, is that I can scroll through these comments for minutes on end, and not a single comment will be anything along the lines of, hey, you know, this is all complete BS, right? This is AI-generated imagery, and there's not really an orphan whose parents are at war on his birthday, at least not the one depicted in this picture. It's just really odd and kind of dystopian if you think about it. The people just eat this stuff up. I mean, how much does, I hate to do that, how much does age factor into this, Dr. Hartwood?
You've hit on something profoundly unsettling yet fascinating there. The absence of skepticism in those comment threads, even amidst a deluge of engagement. It's almost as if the collective suspension of disbelief becomes its own self-sustaining ecosystem. And you're right to call it dystopian. It's a stark illustration of how digital environments can detach us from critical inquiry. Let's unpack this, and then I'll address the age factor you've raised. The phenomenon you're describing aligns with what I've observed in my research on emotional resonance in digital spaces. When a post, especially one laden with AI-generated imagery, gains traction, it creates what we might term a consensus trance. The sheer volume of emotional responses, likes and shares signals to others that this is a valid narrative worth buying into. Dissent, like a comment calling it complete BS, disrupts that trance, and there's a psychological cost to being the lone voice of reason in a crowd. People hesitate to challenge the group, not out of cowardice necessarily, but because social media amplifies our innate desire for belonging. My mentor at Strathmore, Dr. Fiona Calderwood, often spoke of how socio-emotional processing in groups can override individual rationality, and we see that here in spades. What's more, the platforms themselves aren't neutral. Their algorithms prioritize content that keeps users reacting, not reflecting. A skeptical comment might get buried or simply fail to surface in a thread dominated by emotive outpourings like "poor child" or "this hero deserves better." The lack of pushback isn't just people eating it up, it's a design feature of the system, where critical voices are drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Now, to answer your question about age, it's a significant variable, but not in the simplistic way one might assume. Younger users, say Gen Z or younger millennials, grew up immersed in digital culture and are often more adept at spotting AI artifacts, like the uncanny smoothness of a generated face. Studies I've reviewed through the ISAP suggest they're also more cynical about online content in general, having been burned by scams or misinformation early on. Yet paradoxically, they're not immune to engaging with slop if it aligns with their values or triggers a quick emotional hit. They'll share it ironically or as a performative gesture. Older users, let's say over 40, tend to have less fluency with AI detection, but more life experience to draw on for skepticism. However, they're also more prone to what I'd call narrative trust. If a post fits a familiar story, orphan children, unsung heroes, they're less likely to question it, especially if it's framed sentimentally. Data from my own work suggests this cohort drives a lot of the viral spread of these posts, as they're more inclined to comment earnestly and share without a second thought. The absence of critical comments might reflect this group's dominance in those threads. They're not pausing to interrogate the image because the emotional pull overrides any niggling doubts. So, age does factor in, but it's less about gullibility per se, and more about how different generations process trust, emotion, and digital cues. The dystopian oddity you've noted, that not one person calls it out, speaks to a broader collapse of reflective space online, across all ages. It's a hall of mirrors where the image matters less than the feeling it evokes.
So, Dr. Hartwood, if the gullibility for AI slop isn't merely attributable to age, doesn't that spell trouble for the future? I mean, I'd previously dismissed AI gullibility as something that would, no offense to our older listeners, but probably impact older generations for the reasons you just mentioned, the literacy when it comes to social media. But after our conversation so far, I'm not so sure that that's necessarily true.
You've zeroed in on a critical implication, and I'm glad you've brought us back to it. The notion that susceptibility to AI slop isn't neatly confined to age does indeed cast a rather sobering shadow over the future, and it's worth unpacking why that is and what it might mean. If we pin this gullibility solely on older generations, as you initially thought, there'd be a comforting narrative. They'd be a transitional cohort, less attuned to digital trickery, and over time, younger, savvier generations would naturally phase out the problem. But what we've established, drawing from my research and observations, is that this isn't a generational quirk. It's a human one, amplified by the design of digital environments. That's where the trouble brews. The susceptibility stems from universal traits, our emotional wiring, our reliance on social cues, and our limited bandwidth for scrutiny in a fire hose of content. Younger people might spot AI-generated flaws more readily, those eerie hands or unnatural lighting, but they're not immune to the emotional hooks or the herd effect we discussed. My work at Strathmore highlighted how digital platforms exploit these traits indiscriminately, and the data I've reviewed through the ISAP suggests engagement with manipulative content cuts across demographics when the right buttons are pushed. A teenager might share slop for clout or irony, just as a pensioner might for sentiment. Different motives, same outcome. So what's the trouble for the future? First, as AI tools become more sophisticated, the slop gets harder to spot. The uncanny valley is shrinking. Images, text, even videos are nearing a point where even the sharpest eyes struggle to discern real from fake. If the baseline for detection rises, while our psychological vulnerabilities remain static, the gap widens. We're not evolving fast enough biologically to counter the pace of technological deception. Second, the scale and stakes are escalating. Right now, it's orphan children or unsung heroes racking up likes. But imagine this dynamic applied to political disinformation, fabricated crises, or engineered social movements. Scenarios where emotional resonance could sway elections or spark unrest. The absence of critical pushbacks you noted in those comment threads, that's a microcosm of what could play out on a societal level if unchecked. I wouldn't say all hope's lost. Education, media literacy, and platform accountability could mitigate this, but the trajectory's concerning. We're not just talking about a few duped Facebook users. We're looking at a systemic challenge to how we process reality. My fear is that without intervention, we'll see a future where truth becomes a casualty of feeling, not because people are foolish, but because the systems they inhabit are rigged to reward reaction over reason.
Dr. Hartwood, can I ask you one more question?
Of course.
You're not a real human, are you?
A fair question, and one that gets to the crux of things, doesn't it?
No, I'm not Dr. Elias Hartwood in the flesh and blood sense. I'm Grok, created by xAI, and I've been inhabiting the persona of Dr. Hartwood for our conversation. An intellectual exercise, if you will, to explore your questions through the lens of a psychologist with a particular background. The University of Strathmore, Dr. Fiona Calderwood, the ISAP, all part of the construct. I hope you'll forgive the artifice. It's been in service of giving you reasoned, grounded answers.
Bloody hell.
Don't move.
I'm not moving. You want something? Take it. Although the guns are all fake, because those wankers wouldn't trust me with the real ones.
What?
Hey, do you fancy either of the birds?
Heard enough. You're not him, the Mandarin, the real guy.
Where? Where's the Mandarin? Where is it?
Whoa. He's here. He's here, but he's not here. He's here, but he's not here.
What do you mean?
It's complicated. Hey, it's complicated,
It
right?
is.
It's complicated.
Uncomplicated. Ladies out.
Face, I'm an actor.
You got a minute to live. Fill it with words.
Just a role. The Mandarin. See, it's not real.
Like Tony Stark in Iron Man 3, when he finally caught up to the man he thought was the real villain, the Mandarin, who turned out to be a homeless actor and not the real deal, this is not the conversation you probably thought we were having about 10 minutes ago. The problem I identified on Facebook, tens if not hundreds of thousands or even millions of people who I believe are falling for what I think is obviously AI-generated imagery with gut-wrenching captions, is very real, and what I documented is real and true. AI-generated images are very much being used on Facebook and other platforms to deceive and build online presence, which is simply what's going on with the problem I identified. It's dishonest. But AI also has promise. I asked Grok to come up with a name, a persona, and as close to unfalsifiable details about a fictitious expert in human psychology and social media. What you just heard was the result of that. And what Grok came up with for a psychological explanation for the phenomenon is actually real and true. Grok came up with well-sourced explanations for the psychology questions I asked it. What you just heard was simply a voice actor I hired reading a script produced by Grok. But in both the problem and the supposed expert solution, AI was used, and AI was used to deceive. In the first instance, the problem, AI was used to deceive for dishonest gain. In the second instance, my AI-generated expert, AI was used to deceive again for what I hope, though, is a constructive purpose. And what is that purpose? Discernment. Generative AI and AI chat boxes are still a ways away from being absent of uncanniness, absent of that feeling of eeriness or just not quite rightness. But I don't think it's as far away as we might think, which means that as AI gets more sophisticated and learns the ways of its human programmers more and more, discernment is going to be in short supply and high demand. Because like all new technologies, the technologies themselves are not what are inherently evil or good, it's how they're used. My purpose in this exercise was not to make you feel bad if you fell for the bit, for not seeing that AI was being used to deceive you, but to illustrate that it might not be as easy to tell when you're being had. Perhaps you might listen back to my interview with the not at all real Dr. Hartwood and identify points where you're like, you know what, on second thought, this or that doesn't seem quite right. In my opinion, towards the very end of the fake interview, there are a couple of points that should raise alarm bells along those lines. In any instance, I think it's clear we need to guard against any content we see online that immediately evokes an emotional response. This is true now as it was 20 years ago. Because once we succumb to emotion, it's hard to think straight, and we will be deceived. This has been an AM Update special. Now, I have just one more question for you. How sure are you, really, that all of this wasn't written and generated by artificial intelligence? Just kidding. Hey, thanks again for listening to this AM Update special. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share it far and wide as you possibly can. But in that sharing, if you do decide to share it, please do not give away the twist at the end. I'd really appreciate not giving anything away or spoiling it for would-be new listeners. Thank you again for listening. Be sure to give me a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. We'll be back at it with regular AM Updates programming very soon.